So, thanks a lot for being with us. So, take a seat, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just flicking over my notes, and we're going to start very shortly. It will be better than the inaugural session that was outstanding, by the way. So you're here to talk about the nitty-gritty, trust, confidence, how to restore trust. We worked quite a lot together, and we've managed to establish a climate of trust altogether. So it bodes well for the continuation of this session. 4 speakers will take the floor. I'm going to start with Sibyle Vale. Sibyle Vale is a student, an advisor at the Élysée Palace, and she's been working at Radio France since 2013. In 2018, she became the CEO, and she wrote a book. At the start, people listened, and to put an end to this society where people vent their most violent feelings. So all the books that I will talk about will be signed at the FNAC bookshop, because many people today have written a book. Gabrielle, a philosopher from the normal school. She is a specialist in hybridization, and she wrote a book with a nice title, so Extolling Hybridization, at the Pommier publishing house. I don't know if it's an hybridized apple tree. Jacques ASCHENBROICH, who was at the École des Mines school, he held a position in a ministerial cabinet, and then he was at Saint-Gobain, and he was the CEO at Saint-Gobain, and with some executive functions at Orange. Dominique, now a former athlete, 400 meters, not the 400 hurdles. She will be talking about performance as well. She created a consulting firm in innovation. She worked a lot for female football, women's football, and she's a member of the executive committee of MEDEF and chairwoman of the female network at MEDEF. So these are the 4 guests with Yann ALGAN. Yann ALGAN will deliver an introduction from a society based on distrust to a trust-based society. Thanks a lot. Good afternoon to all of you. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you. It's an honor to be with you as well. And I'd like to thank all the speakers, high-caliber speakers. Allow me to introduce this session. So we've distributed our roles. I will be talking about distrust, and the atmosphere will be grim. Then we'll be talking about trust. We will come up with some optimistic and sanguine solutions. So for past 10 years, as part of the distrust society, for the first time ever, we've put words and figures to a feeling of discomfort. The French people didn't trust the companies, the institutions, the governments, and they didn't trust one another. Asked what would you do if you meet someone for the first time? French people will tell you, we don't trust this person. And it was really a negative for growth, for prosperity. So trust is the pillar regarding economic trade and exchanges of views, with a strong impact on the poor well-being. So well-being is defined by good social relationships. So a distrust society boils down to a society of anguish. 10 years later, with the late Daniel Cohen, we analyzed the political impact of distrust, and we've shown that distrust in institutions led to a strong polarization of our society. That's why lots of people voted against the system, and a week ago, we published a memo, France with a tweet, and we looked at the emotional distrust. So we looked at different conversations on the social networks, and the most significant emotions is anger. And anger has increased by 60%, especially following the Yellow Vest movement, and people are very angry. Radical right voters are angry about taxes and immigration. There's another type of anger with the radical left regarding inequalities. So what is at stake? How to transform anger into hope? And before I hand over to the different speakers, allow me to tell you what is at stake, what are the challenges. So the issue of distrust, the issue of anger is brought about by two momentous events, two momentous dimensions. People are resentful of the excesses of capitalism. People think that they were not sheltered enough from the big risks entailed in capitalism. So there's a kind of resentment, especially in the two extreme parties. But regarding trust in others and regarding immigration, for our citizens, they have a problem with the others because they are lonely at work, lonely in their areas, lonely at home, and this is what is at stake. From an industrial society to a post-industrial society, we ended up with individuals who are isolated. So at the end of the day, if you consider the concept of community is about emotions, resentment, anger, and this is the poison of democracy, and it is high time to transform this poison into positive programs and solutions. And our speakers will come up with those solutions and programs. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Yann. You alluded to a book that you wrote with Daniel Cohen, Marcel Foucault, Elizabeth Besley, The Origins of Populism, a book that you can get at the FNAC bookshop, and you will be signing this book at 4 p.m. So, Sibyle Vell, let us start with you. You are in the media business. There's a climate of decreasing distrust. And what about the media? Did the media accelerate distrust? Thanks a lot. As a media person, we looked at the way people have behaved. And the world is increasingly complex, not more difficult. When it's more complex, it means that people can't understand the world. And it's totally different when you know the problems and when you know how to cope with them. You have social, economic causes. I'm not going to revisit them because these social and economic causes will be discussed. Then you have a catalyst, i.e., you have a media-based economy that has changed altogether with the advent of the digital industries after World War II. If we are to revisit history, there was a kind of consensus in order to regulate mass media, because in the 1930s, it was observed that radio was used to disseminate violent words, fueling the rise of extreme movements after World War II. Moderation rules were established, pluralism, impartiality, neutrality, and these values were supposed to manage the ecosystem of radio and television companies. As we moved away from World War II, there was an appetite for less moderation. New players came in. The economy of tension came to the fore, coupled with growing individualism, something that we are currently witnessing. And the tension economy has gained ground, and the social networks have prospered with that. So you have different reasons for that. So the most emotional contents, they go viral because you're going to spend a lot of time. And, of course, you have emotions. So people will react when you have some contents based on anger, based on tensions. So anger is an emotion that is quite rampant in some social networks. Then you have anonymity, a lot of anonymity. So people don't feel restrained, violence of words, violence of images, and violence is being disseminated across the other spheres of company. If you consider social networks, they are Uberized, or they have Uberized the communication systems. It was the case of the digital economy in other spheres. So anyone can express himself or herself, can mobilize the others, anyone can react. And this is a sea change because it means that public speaking is increasingly horizontal thanks to the social networks. And of course, the impact is significant. The Yellow Vest movements, after the young death of the young Nael, all these contents went viral. The politicians, they used the disintermediation. They wanted to have a direct link with the media. This is what Barack Obama did in a subtle way. And then Donald Trump popularized the word of fake news. He was the first to talk about fake news. And on his Twitter account, lots of people retweeted, so he stigmatized the media. And he said the media is disseminating fake news. So fake news abounded. Lots of criticism were leveled at traditional and conventional media, and they used some codes of the social networks. Moreover, people were more critical at the institutions and political leaders. This is the deregulation of the media system. It increases distrust, and it means that opinions are polarized today. So we have a strong responsibility. We attach a lot of importance to food, to healthy food. So what we put in the brain of people plays a key role, is absolutely pivotal. So it means that information should be a public good. The way information is disseminated, moderated, checked up, vetted is a key element of trust and a pillar of democracy. But what do we see today? Asymmetry of regulations between what is happening in the media, in the social networks. Moreover, a part of the population has decided to use the networks because these people didn't feel that they were conspicuous in the media. And we know that in France, the media is based in Paris. You have lots of national media, but in other countries, you have some local media that is more present. So basically, people have a sense of belonging, not a sense of belonging to feelings, but a sense of belonging to some places where people meet. So after self-criticizing the system, can you tell me what you intend to do regarding trust? So you've said that people are in a kind of bubble, so everybody is swimming in his or own corridor. Hybridization. So before I talk about hybridization, allow me to talk about those swimming corridors. So allow me to share a sentence from a Japanese novelist. he said, Mr. Bozuro, the men who made the food that you eat, they built the house that you live, all of these essentials, all these people are unknown people. This is a sentence dating from 1937, and in 2024 things haven't changed. It's quite the opposite. I think we are quite unknown to one another. We don't know each other, and there are lots of biases, lots of mental reservations, and that breeds distrust. Why have we come to this point? So, at the start of humankind, we were rational in order to build sciences, to understand the natural disasters and understand the world around us. But our rationality has turned out to be very rigid, and our brain is a kind of massive production plant or factory. So, for example, we put people in a box, our friends, and you have jobs and professions. They are put in a box. You have manual professions, technical professions, intellectual professions. You have young people, you have senior citizens, you have seniors. So we put people and elements in boxes, and we are building absurd boundaries across jobs, across businesses, across generations, across regions, and this compounds the rifts, and it means that this breeds distrust, and you will nurture people self-interest. So I looked at the Jean-Jacques Rousseau speech. He said, we have painters, artists, but we don't have citizens any longer. So people are fending for themselves, and they don't care about the others. So what about the common good? Something that I've observed in the past few years, that it is not something inexorable. In France, in other countries, you have some weak signals, positive signals, and they bear witness to the fact that things can be reconciled. I mean, there are things that can be reconciled, and these weak positive signals are hybridization based. We can build bridges across the world. So I will give you some examples. For example, in the different regions and areas, there are some places, third-party places. You will have a startup incubator, a residence of artists, and a grocery based on solidarity. You have third places. So you have design schools, research schools, engineering schools, and they are cooperating. We don't have. We have some players who are playing ball together during the energy crisis. At the peak of the energy crisis, hotel managers, restaurant managers, public canteen managers, and private canteen managers, they decided to cooperate and to pool their bio-waste in order to use mechanization, to embark upon mechanization and produce energy. This is what hybridization is all about. And these are weak and positive signals, and they are not scattered. And if we bound them together, if we add that up, they will show that hybridization could be the main trend of the world to come. So we will assess a company, a researcher, an elected representative according to his ability to hybridize and to connect the worlds and to bridge the worlds.
Et qui va être jardinier?
Who will be the gardener? That's an interesting question, because Aristotle said that the role of a politician is to create a friendship between the members of a city. It seems to be mundane. It seems to be murky to a certain extent. But if you look at all of the political programs, you could think that politicians have a role to play on many fronts. But whatever the shock, whatever the big program, it's important to get some friendships with the members of a city. But I disagree with Aristotle. But it's not the role of the only role of the politician. The organizations, the associations, the different people, the different players have something to do in order to nurture friendship in this society. So this is what I would call a shared responsibility. So allow me to talk about civil society. Civil society has to to wake up. So, Jacques, let's talk about companies, the corporate world. What is the idiosyncrasy of the corporate world regarding trust? So there are different words. You have trust and distrust here. So I had in mind, trust boils down to rational, distrust boils down to irrational, and distrust boils down to politicians, and trust boils down to people. So if there is no trust, there is no trade. And why the company is a world characterized by trust? You have rational dimensions. You have lots of people who can exchange. The board has a role to play with people from all walks of life, and they talked about different topics with some specific and precise data regarding technologies, markets, competitors, and from these data, with the executive committee, they try to find the best solutions for the company. So you have the role of the board, the role of the executive board, you have the role of trade unions as well. There are some discussions across different bodies, and you have to consider the role of the general meeting and the stakeholders, or amongst whom the shareholders, the customers, the clients, and everything is based on high rationality. With a permanent analysis, it's important to understand the trends and the developments. It's a matter of striking a good balance between the short term and long term. This is very difficult to achieve in a company, especially when you have some technological disruptions, as it is the case today in many jobs and businesses. You've seen that skills have changed. It's important to recruit people. We've noticed that the world is increasingly globalized. You have some geopolitical problems, and everything is based on rationality. But at the same time, the politicians or the political community, political world, I don't want to be bad with them. They are not with us this year. They were not invited, but I could add other people as well, people who are speaking. So I may have a lot of foes, but the economists, the sociologists are in the same bag, i.e. the irrational world. So Sibyle made the same comment. We've moved from a nuance to a motto. It's easier to sell when you are provocative, instead of having a wise judgment, instead of debating, assessing the pros and cons, the dangers and opportunities. So I can tell you that we are in a kind of dual world, whereby companies continue to operate in a rational, positive fashion, and the people who are in the company, two-thirds of French people, voted for the extremes in the last elections, and two-thirds of the employees, voted for the extremes, especially in the company that have managed. But this is something that is not tangible in the daily workings of the company. So regarding trust and distrust, this trust-based world in the company, will it continue to exist in a world where there will be distrust? The answer is yes, because the modus operandi is well structured, but at the same time, the extremes shouldn't grab power. And there are some people who want to destroy companies that are considered to be places of exploitation. I will tell you an anecdote, but a socialist elected representative, she wanted to visit one of our factories, and she wanted to talk with the trade unions. I banned that. You will be able to meet them when you visit the company. And at the end of the day, she told me, your employees seem to be happy, and the factory is clean and modern. This is what she told me, and she had an obsolete Zola-type perception about the corporate world. But companies invest in the future, and they cast a future-oriented eye. And there's a toing and froing process. The balance between the present and the future the balance between the short-term and long-term. And the companies try to streamline and rationalize the decision-making process. And if you consider the political circles, people are living in a kind of irrational world.
I'm going to carry on now with you, Dominique. The first thing that comes to mind for me is the fundamental question, is the social question that was around in the 19th century and kept going in the 20th century, which was a question of total distrust. Has this been resolved, partially at least, by compromise and discussions with trade unions? Is that what perhaps might be lacking today in civil society, where we are seeing the opposite? There isn't any compromise or trade-off. Perhaps compromise isn't quite the right word, but have businesses solved this problem of trust, Dominique? Thank you, everybody. I'd first of all like to thank the organisers of the Rencontres Économiques, because they've been very agile as teams. I want to thank Jean-Hervé Lorenzi in particular. Yes, I would say that I share this view. Our society is fragmented, our society is broken, and the software that is operating in our society is a Shakespearean software of sound and fury. We've seen it in the street, we've seen it in our politics, and we're seeing TikTok-based civilization, whereby any posted opinion becomes a public opinion, and there's no perspective. We're seeing a civilization of the immediate, of the temporary, of the evanescent. So buzz and clashes are the key thing. Conflicts are becoming the norm. Societal conflicts are becoming the norm, and in the end, the general interest is losing its place to antagonism. So when I think of these two words, trust and distrust, distrust seems to be winning. Trust is seeping away. It seems to be a very dark picture, but we're used to it every day, and it's great to see that we're having a discussion here today, because it's increasingly difficult to find places where we will build society. Where are those places where we build society today? In the midst of this maelstrom, many institutions and organizations are trying to withstand. Many of these organizations are shaken and trying to survive. My belief is that some of these institutions are businesses which are not on the front pages of the newspapers every day, even though our relationship with work and labour has changed and has been challenged here in France. Nonetheless, when we look at public opinion in businesses, 75% of employees say that they are happy in their company. It's one of the rare places where people are still happy, because businesses have become a place of stability and sustainability. My belief is that business is a key stakeholder in rebuilding trust in our society. Why do I say that? Because business is an economic solution. It focuses on creating value. It's a place where we can still move up in society. It's a place of ecology where we're investing massively in the transitions. It's also a place of discussion and dialogue where there is a structured form of social dialogue within companies and between companies with the trade unions and employers' associations. In order to summarize what I want to say, I want to tell you a fable that you might have heard before, La Fontaine fable of the cat and the fox. The cat and the fox are walking along together, discussing, arguing, talking about their fears together. And the fox says, I've got lots of solutions to face our fears, and particularly the fears of the dogs that are going to attack me. And the cat says, I've only got one solution. A dog comes up, and the boastful fox gets eaten because he hasn't found the right solution amongst all of his many solutions, and the cat just ran away and climbed a tree and escaped. We have no choice. We have to make the right choice, and I think my belief in any case is that business is the correct choice. We need to go further. What does businesses need to do? Just after the Second World War, 1948, after the crises of the 30s, there was a Hungarian thinker who talked about reinserting business in society, and I think that's where we're at now. Businesses no longer have the choice. When they set their strategies and their policies, focusing on their missions, their purposes, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about businesses reinserting themselves in the society, in a society of trust. Business needs to go further, of course. It needs to go even farther. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus said to the disciples, go out into the open water. And the first thing we need to do is let the businesses have a free hand to discover and express themselves. I have the personal conviction, and I hope that all business leaders will one day share it, and that's that we need to invest massively in training and education, not just training people and educating them in maths simply because we're falling behind in the PISA rankings. If we want to build a society of trust with business, we need new talents based on human sciences. We'll need philosophers, sociologists, psychologists in our businesses in order to build trust and to put people at the heart of this fragmented society, because that's how we will redefine our social contract. Thank you very much. Thank you for this very optimistic speech about business. Gabrielle, HALPERN, do you share this point of view that businesses is a place where there's a lot of boxes, if you like, the bosses at the top and others? Yes, I'd agree with you. That's why businesses and research centres need to ask this question and learn to think differently, think outside the box. For things to work differently, there needs to be a kind of transgressive way of thinking. I think we need to take this transgressive way of thinking on because it's a generous transgression. When we were going through the pandemic, a number of businesses opened their doors at night time and during the weekends to host homeless people. I know there's some that are carrying to do it. This is a kind of transgression of the physical boundaries and the mental boundaries that there are. And I think there's a path we could follow which would enable us to rebuild trust in this way. In order for that to work fully, we will also need to think about the way we relate to time. This trust-distrust continuum is related to the way we think about trust. I've worked with some ministers, and some number of political speechwriters were also historians. I think that it's quite important to think about who is writing the speeches. Historians will always refer public policies back to the past, as if the past history was a way to read and justify the present and the future. As professionals, we always take decisions based on the past, as if we need to be consistent with our own selves. So I'm not talking about drawing a line under the past, but we should question whether we need to be faithful to the past or whether we actually need to be faithful to the future. If we want to build a full sense of trust, we need to think about what the future is going to mean. Let's go back to the question of media in a moment, but Jacques, when we talk about business, do we see distrust in business? I know you've got a number of foreign subsidiaries. Do you see some similar questions coming up, or is France a bit different? I would say from our point of view, there's no difference in what's going on in France and other countries in terms of the way our business operates and the way our staff operates. Something was said about the way businesses are very hierarchical and everyone in box. I think it's a bit of an old-fashioned view of businesses. There's been a lot of change in the management methods used in business. There's lots of collaboration between teams in different countries working as a project, and they're trying to take businesses out of these little boxes. And the businesses that achieve this sense of getting out of the box are the ones that move fastest and furthest in this fragmented world, which has a lot of challenges. The businesses that will succeed are those that are able to manage the technology and go faster than their competitors. It's just like in a 400 meters race, you need to be faster than your competitors in order to win. There is a permanent competition. Permanent competition doesn't mean dislocation. Permanent competition does not mean theft of natural resources. It doesn't mean failing to protect the environment. It takes all of these elements into account. We see that businesses, and sometimes perhaps pushed to a greater extent by their customers than by NGOs or politicians, are taking these considerations into account. Internal issues around competitiveness, but also all of the societal concerns around training, around the environment, around respect for human rights. And this is all happening in a world where what politicians say starts to seem meaningless. Let me give you two recent examples. One is this expression that we hear around recently around simplification. We talk about simplification, but we've created two monsters. One is a duty of vigilance, and the second is a whole set of 1,000 indicators that businesses have to track, and they're really difficult and complex to understand. So at the same time, we're talking about simplification, but we're making things more complex. And what we're expecting from politics is firstly to protect citizens and businesses, but unfortunately, to the contrary, through the rules that are put in place, we are increasing the legal risks on our companies in France and in Europe. These legal rules are completely asymmetric with what's going on in other parts of the world, in particular in the big competitors, the USA and China. I think the words of politicians no longer are very meaningful, but in business, the words can still bringing people along. As Dominique said, 75% of workers agree with the company strategy and policy for the company they work for. Thank you very much, Jacques. Let's go back to the question of media. You talked about the deregulation of the media ecosystem. Sibyle, what can be done? What are you doing? First of all, the first thing that I want to say is that we are on the foothills of a revolution, a bigger revolution that is to come. The AI revolution, the artificial intelligence revolution, is going to have a major impact on information and news. When ChatGPT takes in new information, chews it up to putting a new text, we all know if we do any cooking that good ingredients don't necessarily make a good recipe. Many things that come out of ChatGPT are wrong, are false, and so we are likely to see an increase in biased, poorly contextualized or erroneous information. This can take us in bad directions or in good directions, and this will happen because we haven't learnt all of the lessons about the societal dynamics that have been generated by the increase of social media. Social media, we think, is responding to a desire for human connection, but it actually breaks down human connection. Anonymity allows for anything, but how can we make people more responsible? How can we bring a better philosophy to those who are described as super spreaders? We need to think about this, otherwise we'll face individuals such as Elon Musk, who's reducing moderation and makes more space for community. That means that the people who are in the biggest group will decide for everyone. So we need to go forward without being naive and being responsible and accountable for the consequences that all this is happening on our young people, our teenagers, all of those people who are growing up and learning to live with people in this society, and particularly in this world of social media. My second point, and speaking specifically about media, is that media sometimes are inclined to talk about controversies and what is buzzing at the time, particularly when their business model is fragile. So there's always a question of sustainable business model. In order to have strong national media outlets, there needs to be an ecosystem which promotes a sustainable business model, because producing news requires teams, it requires people on the ground, and it requires rules about concentration, about integration that feed into a media ecosystem which is economically strong, which will allow it to be independent and will not be subjected to the pressure of the new competitors. At the end of the day, the question for all of these stakeholders is how can we connect people together? How can we make sure that part of the population which uses social media because they didn't see themselves reflected in other spheres can find a place, find themselves reflected in the content that is presented, in the speeches that are made by our political leaders? How can we ensure that all of the feelings that are present in society are expressed in a positive way, not simply to generate buzz, but in order to explain things, to understand things, and to help us to find our way through an increasingly complex world? Let me be very concrete. I'm a journalist. Journalists love to add to controversies and create the buzz, sometimes even create controversy. At Radio France, we are sometimes part of this. How can you manage journalists' tendency to add to controversies or the scorn and mockery that you find in the media? You're absolutely right. We're not perfect. But we do continually question ourselves. We question one another. What you've been saying is correct. So over the last few days is that over the last few years, we've been saying we need to not lose our biggest asset, which is the public's trust. So we've been working a lot on the ethics of our journalists. I've taken some fairly tough decisions with regard to people who didn't comply with these roles. A comedian and some journalists from our team. It's led me to question the way we operate and explain how we operate. We've opened up our editorial teams, brought in members of the public to understand what we're doing. It helps the public to understand how we operate, but it also requires us to think about and question the way we're doing things, how we're choosing our subjects, not just the latest controversy, but being balanced. We are lucky enough to be a public service media organisation. We don't always have the same pressures in terms of achieving audience numbers. We can be guided by the role that we play in a media system in order to build trust. So we've made trust our number one priority in the choices and the organisational structure that we are putting in place. Thank you very much. Dominique, CARLAC'H, you were a great athlete. I'm sure you still are, actually, by the way. Would you be able to make an analogy on the theme of trust between the world of sporting achievement and our society? As I was listening to the different speakers on this panel, I was thinking, how efficient is trust or distrust? And I was thinking about my sports career. As the moderator said, in the 1990s, I ran for France in the 400 meters alongside Marie-Jo Pérec, for example. We sometimes were roommates together, and I watched her career develop. To what extent did trust or distrust feed into our performance and our career? Distrust can be useful if you're winning. If you are going to do the pole vault in the Olympic Games and you have three Germans trying to make Renaud Lavillenie fall down so he's not champion, it might work, but it will only work once. But trust is something that's built over time. Marie-Jo Pérec was Olympic champion 3 times, once in 1992 and twice in 1996. Why did that happen? After 1992, Elle didn't believe in herself anymore. She didn't know what to do, but she took another step. She moved to the USA and decided to trust someone and rebuild her career. So with this analogy of sustainable performance, I'm trying to say that trust builds a sustainable performance, whereas distrust is good for one-off performance. Before I hand back to Yann for the conclusion of this session, I want to open up to the floor. I want to remind you that we're asking you to ask questions rather than making long speeches or tell your life story. Let's give the microphone to the lady at the back of the room. Let's start with a lady. Ladies first, please. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm German, but I followed things in France for a number of years. Mr. Aschenbroich, the question that I've wondered about when you say that around 2/3 of people in the businesses that you have managed may have voted for the extreme right or left-wing parties. How would you explain this? How would you explain this phenomenon? We think that business is a place of rationality. We know that 75% of employees are happy in their businesses, but nonetheless they vote for extreme parties. Jacques, the question is for you. I don't have an answer to this question. I just used it as an example, an analogy. Politics don't come into the business. The debates are there. We can agree or don't agree. Even in boards of directors or executive management committees, there are discussions and debates. We discuss things with the trade unions. We don't always agree, but our workers are part of they're members of the public. It's not. What I should have said is it's not impossible. I should have been a bit more careful in the way I spoke, but. It's not impossible that as citizens they voted for the extreme parties. I don't know that because political debate doesn't come into the world of business. For me, the most important thing in business is trust, and in particular, the trust of your customers. If you lose your customers' trust, your business will die. So trust is a permanent feature of business. It needs to be there with the customers. When you listen to politicians, they don't understand that the most important person in a business, the most important people are the customers. Without the customers, there will be no business. After that, the next most important are the staff. But you need to make your staff understand that the most important are the customers. The bosses are less important than the staff and less important than the customers. The boss is just the one who makes sure that you maintain a steady direction in a complex world. But the customer base is the most important asset of any business. And what I was trying to say is that I don't know how my staff vote, the staff in the companies that I lead, but it is not impossible that in our society they vote just like other members of our society. But the important thing is that that doesn't come into our business world. Dominique. just to add to that answer, I think we need to distinguish between the employee and the citizen. Our employees and staff members are generally happy as employees. Why is that? Because trust in a business is based on three things: setting a good example, maintaining a healthy dialogue, and the ability to look to the future. That's the opposite of the political context, which says that our employees or our citizens turn towards extreme far right or left parties. Another short question, please. Yes, a very short question to the business leaders here. You talked about these 2/3 of people who vote for the extreme parties. I don't recognize that classification. I do hope that 2/3 of our population will avoid the worst case scenario. But I've got a different question. We can ask the question of distrust. Is that not a result of the failure of our elites, our economic elites who have sinned through their greed? Yann, do you want to respond to that? Dominique, perhaps? I think when I explained this theory of reinserting business in society, it was a way of saying to you that Milton Friedman is dead. The purpose of a business is not only generating profit for stakeholders. This isn't anymore in any case. Since the advent of corporate social responsibility, obviously not all businesses don't do it, but it's a key aspect of the competitive aspect, the attractive aspect of business to take into account these things. But people don't believe in it. Which people? People who are voters and who distrust capitalism. They don't believe that corporate social responsibility is going to save the system and that their lives are going to get better. I think the message that I'm trying to say is that distrust is not exclusively something in businesses, much less in businesses than with regard to our politicians. Jacques ASCHENBROICH. Let me come back to this point. Greed. There are studies carried out, surveys carried out every year with respect to the sharing of value. Who takes the greatest part of the value of the business? Of course, it's the employees. Next, it's the investments, then the state, and in a very marginal manner, shareholders. I think when you talk about greed, we need to be very careful because it's a controversial way of speaking. They're filling their pockets, etc., etc. I hear people say that business leaders decide their own salaries. You will have never heard a discussion on a board of directors about the fair pay for the business leaders or the staff of the managers of the business. It's a real discussion, a real debate, which is to do with how value is shared. But this discussion about sharing value, which says shareholders take all the value out of the businesses, that goes against what the figures show. It's not rational to say that. These are arguments, controversies that are put forward by those who want to destroy businesses and who, as I was saying earlier, want to make businesses places where there are no rules. The strength of a business is the very rational way that they operate and the fact that they are organizations that follow a number of very strict rules. It's a very broad discussion. There's a person here at the front. I've got two questions for Mrs. Vey and Mrs. CARLAC'H. I've got a question about public service for young people. In order to build trusts in young people who are turning away from institutional frameworks, I wanted to know what are the initiatives that you're putting in place to offer opportunities for young people. This is CARLAC'H. What initiatives are taken in order to build the young people's trust in businesses in the world of work? First of all, Sibyle. I couldn't explain all the things we do, but if you want to come and talk to me later, do. What we are trying to do today is based on this observation that there's a gap between the different generations. And my generation watched the TV and listened a bit to the radio, but today there are no longer separate swimming lanes. There are separate pools. Young people operate differently depending on what generation they're part. So what we're trying to do is how can we reach them? It's a real challenge, a major challenge for us, for traditional media like ours. It's a major challenge. So we've got a media which is called Le Move, which is being used on social media quite a lot. We are also looking at the questions that public opinion is asking, and we see that this feeling of anger is fed by a bunch of feelings that have developed over the last few years. There's an increasing feeling that some are winning from globalization and others are not winning. And the sense of where living standards are at when you're in a time of inflation. Some people feel that they can't access some of their leisure activities that they would like to. All of these factors feed into the pressure cooker of society, and we need to be able to look at this, describe it with our words, describe this complex society in order to eventually find solutions. Dominique, a few words, and then Yann will conclude. Very quickly, please. I'm going to probably give you a very frustrating answer, because the things we offer young people, we don't offer only to young people. Since the end of the COVID period, what we're seeing is in businesses is increasing desire for autonomy, people to make their own choices. There are new forms of organizing the work based on flexible working. And there's a second point which is a bit tricky. Because we've been through COVID and everyone was afraid of dying, there's not only an individual approach, but also a sense of collective protection. It's really difficult for managers to work with this desire for individual approaches to organizing the work, particularly on the part of young people, but not only young people, but also this sense of needing to protect the collective, protect the community. It's very tricky. Gabrielle HALPERN. Let's remember the work of a philosopher who said that the biggest fear of humans is irreversibility and unpredictability. We've developed lots of technologies, but the two big fears are still there. In order to face this, there's a first key, which is to forgive, and the ability to give and keep promises. If forgiveness and promises are not available, these two big fears go even further. Thank you. Yann, over to you for the conclusion. On behalf of all of the speakers and on behalf of the Cercles Économiques, I want to thank you for your participation. Thank you to all of our speakers. We've covered a number of key subjects. We are facing a lot of headwinds, but there are a number of hopeful approaches, particularly in businesses. So in a big integrated business, who are the people who are less well integrated in society, in nurses, lorry drivers? How can we create trade union structures for these people? There's questions around education and how we invest. We need to teach the youngest generations how to work together, and how in a digitized society where digital media is playing an increasing role, can we regulate? We didn't talk very much, and it's maybe symptomatic. We didn't talk a lot about public policy, public services. They may have a role in the more remote areas in bringing people together in this very lonely and isolated society. Thank you, Yann. Thank you to our four speakers. Thank you, everybody.